Hey, good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank SANS for giving me this opportunity to present this case study. I will give everyone a fair warning. This is not going to be technical talk. It's going to be more of a story time because we are at Disney. So like any good story, we'll start with once upon a time, there was a flour mill. There it is. It was founded in 1882, so it's a very long-standing company. It's founded in a small community in Teutopolis, Illinois. What they did is bring wheat in, turn it into flour. Flour that goes into crackers, cookies, cakes, not flour like the Bambi skunk or the smelly plant. Siemer Milling does have a reputation for trying new things, for being innovative in the space. Over the years, they expanded. They grew it from one company into three sites. The original one was in Teutopolis, Illinois. In 1995, they expanded to Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And then the third mill was built in 2015 in West Harrison, Indiana. That brought total daily production to a bit over 4 million pounds of flour a day. The third site in West Harrison, that's where our story actually takes place. This was built as a greenfield project, partnered very closely with a contractor that we'll get into later. The production for the site was completely controlled by the Windows servers and PLCs. There were no mechanical switches, no knobs, no dials. It was unable to be ran manually. It was completely automated. Like any story, we had to have a cast of characters. First, there's me, the narrator. You can read about me on those bullet points. Who I am is not really important to the story. It's more about what happened. If you're interested in finding more about me, I'm on LinkedIn, not that hard to find, or you can find me outside. I'll be here for a class. The next group are the managers. I'm just going to introduce them as more of a group rather than individuals. It's basically a wide range of the management team. They've all been with Siemer Milling Company for decades. Siemer Milling Company has very long-term employees. I've been there for 25 years, and for some, I'm still a short timer. The management team, they're very well respected in the industry. They present at conferences, they're on various industry boards and the like. The third character in our story is the contractor. Once again, that is a conglomeration of anyone that's in for that company. They have partnered with Siemer Milling Company for over 50 years. So that is a very, very long-standing relationship. That company is worldwide. They have offices and do work around the world. So they're very, very trusted by Siemer Milling. There have been many projects over the years, over the course of 50 years. They've all, for the most part, always gone very, very well. That contractor also trusts Siemer Milling to test out new processes, new equipment. So a lot of times we may be the first or second company on the continent to try something new. Historically, that company is more of the CapEx, where it builds the big machines, and then kind of supplemental to that was the software to run that. So when they built the West Harrison facility, as I mentioned, that was a turnkey solution. So they provided, in addition to all the milling equipment, they provided all the networking, the IT side, the servers, including the hypervisors and the virtual machines, the PLCs, basically everything to get the plant up and running on the OT side. They also handle support for the OT environment, and that's across all 3 of our sites, and maintain the systems. For this new site, Siemer Milling provided the IT side of the environment, as well as the DMZ that would connect the OT environment onto the IT environment and then out to the internet for remote access. We also filtered outbound traffic. That went on pretty static for several years. So that is kind of the background. So now we'll actually move on to more of the meat of the story. This is a very simple diagram of how we started at that location. The OT network was managed completely by the contractor. The firewalls, the DMZ, and the corporate network, that was all managed by the Siemer Milling IT security team, which is small. It's basically one group, 4 people, including myself. So that's why we rely a lot on contractors. The DMZ, it did have its own Active Directory for the identity management. We had jump boxes in there. The RDP, it was only from our IT network, and that was not open to the internet. For remote access from across the internet, we both used Go to My PC to begin with. We had separate jump boxes, so we separated the contractors from employees for remote access. Over time, we added a VPN access with MFA for our employees for remote access to basically replace the Go to My PC. The contractor preferred to use TeamViewer over Go to My PC, so they installed that on their jump box, and that's what they used. And along the bottom, we have a waterfall firewall to move production information from the OT to the IT environment. That all went pretty stable for a couple more years. There were no really outstanding issues until the contractor wanted to introduce cloud services. Cloud services was a way to get, kind of the buzzword, be able to bring data from the OT environment up into cloud, be able to analyze that, and provide that real-time information to managers as well as to the contractor. However, this was something that was outside of their normal control, outside of their normal wheelhouse, rather. So they had to build that from scratch. And to their credit, they actually did. They brought in people. They built their cloud services on Azure. Let's see, built the cloud services on Azure. They installed a router, hung that off of the existing OT network, put their sensors on that separate subnet. They routed that through the OT network out through our existing firewalls. That dotted line is just kind of a virtual representation of where they sent their data out to Azure. It appeared that the people they had installing this were relatively new to the environment. We were also, I believe, maybe the second company that they had deployed this with, because we received a lot of requests to unblock domains and networks. So it was almost like they didn't exactly know what was needed to make their services work. So that provided a lot of confidence. And since they were asking us, it seemed like the other people they were working with did not filter outbound traffic. Eventually, we got that all straightened out, figured out. The services were working as advertised. Every once in a while, we did get a request in to unblock a new domain as they added new features to the environment. And then we started getting it's time to get some changes. At this point, the site was about 10 years old. The hypervisors were original. The VMware code was original. The core switching was still what was put in. So we were going to do a hardware refresh, replace all the hypervisors, add in shared storage, replace the core networking. And at this point, we were going to standardize on what we put in place at all of our other locations, because this turnkey solution did not match up with all the other equipment we put in at our other 2 sites or our IT network. Since it was 10 years old, the OSs for the VMs were also 10 years old. The contractor was planning on replacing all of those OSs, as well as replacing the OT software that would run everything. So then you get everything up to date, get new feature sets. One of the new features was pretty interesting. They were replacing the thick client with a web browser. They were going to run the HMI off of Chrome rather than thick clients. One of the things that was presented by the contractor to our managers was, with this, you can just use a web browser on your desktop in your office and connect right into the OT network and see how things were going without having to go through all the trouble of going through the jump box. That didn't happen. When I asked the contractor about it, their response was, well, it's got encryption, so it's secure. It's got to be true. The contractor said it. As a side note, there was one more piece of equipment that was being installed that was not part of this major upgrade. It was just part of a normal replacing and increasing functionality in our production areas. The way I understand it, it was the grade week coming in. The functionality of that was going to be bringing that sensor data into the cloud, like they did with the roll stands. That required adding some new domains to the unblock list. During conversations, it was explained to me that they would take that data and actually use the results of that to send command changes back to that piece of equipment. That's a control loop that was outside of the scope as what was originally presented to us. That's something that Express didn't really want to have from the very beginning. But since the equipment was purchased, they were part of the way through the deployment. That's something that you just can't really say no at that point, because there's that much of an investment. So had to come up with a different option. Since this is a story, most stories have a short part for exposition. So I'm going to take that a little bit of a detour to talk about risk. I'm sure everyone here is really familiar with the different types of risk. So I'll kind of blow through this really quickly. The first is to just accept the risk. As previously described, I was not comfortable with having that control loop in the environment. So just accepting it wasn't really an option, in my opinion. The second and third options were to avoid or reduce the risk. With the limited amount of control that the Siemer IT had in the OT environment, there wasn't really much that we could do to do either of those. We couldn't reduce or mitigate those risks. So that left transfer the risk. Now, when the first thing that comes to mind normally, at least it does to me, and when you say transfer risk, you talk about cyber insurance. But I had kind of a crazy idea. What if, instead of transferring that risk to a cyber insurance. What if you just transfer that to the contractor? After all, that's what they're wanting to do. So let them own it. So to go ahead and transfer that risk to the contractor, there were a couple of steps we needed to do. I talked to the, had to get management approval from Siemer Milling. So at this point, had to make a proposal to management. Talk to each of the managers individually that were involved, that were decision makers for that site. Talk to them individually. Wanted to get their kind of feel them out ahead of time before I presented this as a group, because if they didn't want to go along with it, it was kind of dead on arrival. So I did talk to them, gave them my idea of just letting the contractor manage the OT environment completely. That would take the Siemer IT and security team completely out of the loop at that point. I did express my concerns with kind of the directions that the contractor was going, some of the decisions they were making, that I didn't think they were the best idea necessarily. I did express that some of the results could be compromise of the system, including ransomware. At the end of the day, all the ones I talked to, they agreed with going ahead and doing that. So I brought everyone together, all the managers together as a group, and presented this proposal to them as a group. So we got the buy-in from everyone. And after that was done, put together an email, summarized, listed out everything that was agreed upon of who would manage what, if the contractor agreed. So I sent that in an email, make sure that was all documented. At that point, things actually went pretty quickly. When the option to present managing the whole OT environment was presented to the contractors, this was in a video conference that included them, our managers, our on-site personnel, the on-site personnel, as well as myself. The contractor pretty much jumped on that. They agreed to that pretty much right away, because they could, at that point, they could do what they wanted when they wanted, based upon agreements with on-site personnel. After this was done, once again, put that all together in an email summary. So there'd be a documentation of what was agreed upon. Part of that agreement of who would manage what was that the OT environment would be split off from the IT environment. It would have its own internet connection. So the OT traffic would no longer travel across the IT network to go out the internet there. They'd have their own internet connection. Siemer Milling did purchase a circuit, internet circuit with static IP addresses. The contact information and support information was passed along to the contractor, as well as all of the as-built documents and passwords for the new hypervisor system, the new core switching, everything that we just put in. They had all those as-built documents, so they would be prepared to manage everything. The only exception to that was that waterfall firewall. So we still did have that OT connection to IT, where only those production reports would be going through that one-way firewall. So this is kind of what the network looked like after they took over. The transfer of the systems to the contractor, it actually went pretty well, or at least we didn't hear of any issues on the IT side. So IT security did not really know exactly what the contractor was doing, other than we supplied them with an internet connection. So how they chose to connect that and get remote access was entirely up to them. Because remote access for Siemer employees was still managed by the contractor. Siemer IT did help a couple of our employees get set up for that remote access. At that point, it became pretty apparent there was no DMZ, there's no jump boxes in a secure environment. You can see in that detailed diagram, it connected directly into TeamViewer. I did simplify that a little bit because it's so complex by taking the waterfall firewall out. So it's still there, you just can't see it. Everything went fairly well during the cutover, but a little over 3 months after the handover, I got a call from the site. It was a Monday morning, of course, and the call started with the internet's down. That's not really terribly helpful as far as trouble reports go, but that's kind of the way support calls go. But a few minutes into the conversation, it was determined that the remote access from the contractor into the OT environment was not available, and the OT environment was not able to reach the internet. Did inform the on-site person that called that we couldn't really directly help them since we did not have access into the system. We never had remote access into the system because it was completely managed by the contractor. But we did pass along, again, the contact information for the ISP since the contractor did not have anyone on site. So the on-site personnel would be able to check with the ISP and verify if there were internet issues. Over the course of a few more calls, it did become apparent that the problem was not the ISP or the cut fiber or anything like that. The internet connection itself was fine. The problem was that the whole OT system was down. At that point, there was a scene from Mulan that popped into my head. I'm sure you can probably guess what it is. So this is production for the entire site was down. That was down at a site that I had recommended to be managed by a company that I believed didn't have the best security practices in place. So how bad was this going to turn out to be? Was this going to turn into a resume generating event? A system that had not faced any type of major security issue in 10 years that it's been in production was down due to ransomware under 4 months after management was handed over to a third party directly because of my recommendation. This wasn't something that was put in front of me that I just didn't object to. This is something that I actively instigated, actively sought out, and followed through on to make sure it happened. At this point, there wasn't really anything I could do. The site itself was about 4 hours away. Remote access wasn't available. As I mentioned, Siemer Milling IT did not have any type of remote access into the system at the best of times. And all the new Windows VMs that were installed, we didn't even have credentials for those, because none of that was handed over to us. That was all managed by the contractor. The entire operation for that site was down. They could not mill flour. That's over 1 million pounds a day if it was down for a whole day. They could not dump wheat trucks. They couldn't even load finished product that was already in the silo. That was all controlled by a single Windows server. And that Windows server is locked down by ransomware. Over the course of that day and a few days after that, pictures started to emerge of what happened. Just remember, there is no DMZ or jump boxes, and there's no outbound filtering of the internet traffic. The firewall that was put in place was actually obsolete and out of support when it was installed. The firewall that had end of vulnerability support at the end of 22 was put into production in the second quarter of 2024. To make matters worse, someone at their corporate office opened a lot of ports on the firewall and did not inform the frontline support personnel that they had made that change. So there's no telling how long all those ports were open. In the bottom left corner, that is a Shodan report that I ran the day of the ransomware attack. So all of those ports were open. So even though the firewall is out of support, that was not the reason for the compromise. With RDP open to the internet and directly connected to a Windows VM, what appeared to be an automated ransomware probe hit and infected virtualized Windows server. It automatically spread to another vulnerable server virtual machine, as well as a Windows PC that was connected to production hardware. We can't really tell for sure what happened. That's just what we kind of inferred, because all the initial incident response and recovery efforts were handled by the contractor. The infected VMs were powered down rather than suspended or disconnected from the network, so anything that might have been in RAM was gone. The firewall itself did not have logging enabled, so that wasn't available. And we were not able to do any type of forensic analysis on the infected VMs because we were not able to get copies of those. Considering that I'm here now and able to tell the story, management did have my back. They understood that there were risks associated with letting the contractor handle everything, and that in the long run, this was actually an opportunity to make things better across the entire company. At the end of the day, we were really, very lucky that as far as ransomware goes, we were hit with pretty much a best case scenario. The contractor was able to get production going in about 4 hours, and full functionality was restored in about 6 hours. So after normal ops were restored, we did have multiple meetings between Siemer Milling and the contractor. We wanted to discover what happened and how to keep it from happening again. One thing I will say is it's a good thing that we had all this in the email, because I was actually kind of surprised that one of the first responses during these meetings was from the contractor that said they are not an IT cybersecurity solution provider. So they were more than happy to take over management when they could do what they wanted, but when I hit the fan, it's not on them. There were other attempts to push responsibility for the security decisions back onto the Siemer IT and security team. But once again, management for Siemer Milling had our back, and they were actually really, really great throughout this whole incident. Looking back, it would have been better to get that in an actual contract rather than just relying on emails. But as mentioned earlier, we had a long-standing, trusting relationship between our companies. But regardless of that, get it in writing. As for the aftermath, we're back to our network diagram. It's very similar to the first one. However, you'll notice a major difference in that the firewall on the DMZ is actually connected out to the internet. We kept the OT environment separate from IT after taking management back from the contractor for the IT security systems, the DMZ. The OT side, contractor still manages that because that's their specialty. So we still rely on them for that. But mostly they stay in their lane, we stay in our lane. We did have Active Directory put into the DMZ. For the jump boxes, we have separate contractor employee jump boxes rather than kind of a mishmash of kind of legacy type remote access. We put in Dispel, secure remote access, with MFA. The contractors, when they connect in, that MFA prompt goes to Siemer employees, so that way they can't connect in without us knowing. We did bring Dragos in for their platform and OT watch. And also we had them do a compromise assessment before handing it back over to Siemer, just because that drive-by ransomware was eradicated doesn't mean there wasn't something else in there, considering all the open ports. The compromise assessment actually came back clean, so there was no indications of any type of C2 or other type of compromises. So I can't express how lucky and glad I was with that finding. So with Dragos in, with the Dragos platform, it helps us to do the asset management, the vulnerability reporting, as well as the managed threat hunting. The sensor for Dragos is on the OT, and we do RDP from the DMZ into the OT through that Dispel wicket. So that is all secure, and that is all recorded as well. So we do have documentation of every remote access session. At the end result of that is that we are able to more closely align with the 5 critical controls for OT security compared to where we started, but especially compared to the middle of the story when the contractor was taking care of everything. That did not align with the critical controls pretty much at all. Now I think we're a lot more closely aligned, and over time we've become more and more closely aligned. First, would I recommend anyone else do what I did? No, absolutely not. What ended up happening was pretty much a best case scenario that demonstrated the risk to our OT system while having a minimal long-term impact due to the limited downtime. So we were extremely lucky. I was extremely lucky. There were quite a few ways everything could have gone sideways, but I did put a lot of faith in management, and they actually did not let me down. So kudos to the management. I really appreciate them. At the end of the day, this turned out to be a valuable learning experience that will make Siemer Milling Company more secure and stronger to infinity and beyond. What can I say except you're welcome?